a very basic chuck that anybody can make. It's called a jam chuck. Somebody is still just making a heck of a racket.
Sorry, that's me. How do I get rid of it?
You just go over to your audio little microphone on the left bottom corner and tap that, and it will stop your audio.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, Kai. How are you? We have a guest from Germany here today. I was in a Zoom conference a couple of weeks ago, and he was a guest from Pennsylvania. And I asked where he came from in Germany, and he says Bad Nauheim. And I lived in Bad Nauheim for about 18 months when I was stationed in Germany when Kai was 10 years old. But any rate, welcome. Any rate, a really basic chuck that anybody can make is to put just a block of wood on a faceplate. And we are going to turn this round and then drill a hole through it. And then we can scrape a pocket in here that is about 3 degrees in angle. That would be 1.5 degrees per side. And we can then put a piece of material in there. It needs to be turned around, but we can put a piece of material in there and hold it. And it holds quite good. I know you may not believe me, but it does hold quite good. And if you want to go a step further, you can actually buy taps from Jerry Beal down in southern Ohio. And you can just drill a tap hole in here and then put this wood tap in and tap the thread of your spindle, and you don't even have to waste the faceplate to put this on. So it's a great trick. I have an 1.8" tap and I have an 1.25" tap, but I don't have a 33 millimeter. They make that, but I've got to order one. So I've mounted this on a faceplate. I will now just take a knockout bar and I'm going to switch cameras. There we go. So I'm just going to put the knockout bar through the spindle. Just hold that like that, right out. And if you have a center stuck in your spindle, don't just keep banging on it. Get a nice big mallet and give it a good whack. It does less damage to your bearings than tapping away forever on it. So I'm going to screw this on. I'm going to make sure I clear here. That's good. Now, in this stage, it never hurts to bring your tailstock in like that and just pin that there. And by pinning it with a tailstock, we're now we only have the radial load on the screws. We've taken the axial load that's parallel to the spindle off. And so we have eminently less chance of throwing this off the faceplate. I'm going to set the speed to something mild here. I've got a roughing out gouge right here. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I almost always have a finger or two or part of my hand in the chip stream so that they don't hit me in the face. And this largely eliminates for a lot the need for a lot of the things a face shield does. Just your little pinky sticking up in the chip stream will make a great difference. You can kind of feel it go around. You can hear it and you can feel it. Got one flat spot here yet. I think I'll just put a little front taper in that, Chuck, and get rid of that flat spot. There we go. And you'll notice I'm not turning very fast. I'm turning at about 500 RPMs. So speed isn't really that necessary for turning. And in fact, with skew chisels, you get a better effect by a bit lower speed. And now I'll take a spindle gouge and just, first time I ever did that. So there's our basic profile. I do like to get them fairly smooth on the outside so that I won't, if I want to grab this and use my hand as a brake or to just turn the work, I'm not going to be annoyed by sharp edges at all. I'm going to put a very slight chamfer in here so I don't have a sharp edge. You always want to watch sharp edges where you have a hard corner in wood turning because it really is like a little knife revolving around and give you the paper cut from hell if you aren't careful about it. It's also a good idea to remove the live center from your chuck, from your tailstock, and that way you're not going to back into that and surprise yourself. You can, I actually hurt myself pretty good years ago by backing into the live center.
Lost the video, Ernie.
All right, thank you.
Back.
All right, I have set up a drill ahead of time here, and this is a number 2 Morse taper drill chuck, but I have a 3 Morse taper socket in my tailstock, so I put a 2 to 3 sleeve right there.
Student count, the final day of voting, 87 days away. Polls say one thing, pundits from either side may say another. But what about the keys? Historian Alan Lichtman.
Oh, here he is. He's a weirdo.
He is a weirdo. He's our weirdo, though.
All right, I'm now going to remove this for a second. And I have a block of wood right here, so I'm going to go back to a set of centers.
Polling suggests that Joe Biden has the upper hand in the 2020 race, but what do the keys tell us? An American University history professor.
Whoever's talking, could they please mute their video? I mean, their audio?
The 2020 presidential race known. With the final day of voting 87 days away.
I think you might have to mute him. It said.
Professor Alan Lichtman.
All right, I'm going to turn this to a cylinder. Unlock my spindle is better. I'm going to bring the speed up a little bit to something. There's about 900 RPM. Now, when I'm looking to come just round, which is a good skill to have, I cover this top of the gouge to hold it down on the rest with my thumb like that. And then I put my fingers there and I can feel when I just go around. Good. Raising the rest to use a skew. And I'm just going to take a nice cut from the center to each end. And I'll take my spindle gouge and take a little chamfer cut on each end. The wood is, this is shell bark, then this is pig nut hickory, and it is really hard. But that, by taking this chamfer on each end of this cylinder, I have brought an area around the edge into a circle, really, into perfect square alignment with the center axis of this. So when I put it into my 3-degree taper in my chuck, this will come square quite easily. If you don't do this, if this end is uneven, it will be very difficult to use this method of chucking. Again, we're going to get rid of that center. Get the tailstock out of the way. And get rid of the other center. We'll now go back to our jam chuck. All right. I'm going to lower my rest a little. And to get my jam chuck to a proper opening, I use a little V scraper. That is just a 1/2 inch wide scraper I ground to this shape. And to be able to quickly chuck this stuff, I use a centuries-old woodturner's tool called an armrest. I made this one myself. I simply got a piece of structural steel. I heated it with a oxyacetylene torch on the end, and with an anvil, I upset the end and brought it around, and then I case hardened it in a material called Case-Height. It's basically bone meal, in which you heat this to red, dip it in the bone meal, and then plunge it in cold water, and it will put about a 3,000 to 5,000 steep hardness to the surface of this metal and make it very wear resistant. So I can put my scraper in here like this. Rest needs to be just a bit higher. Go. Got a long ways to go. The scraper is the only tool we have at the lathe that will make something to a machinist-like fit. It makes this perfectly round, and I actually scraped this area to make it perfectly flat in that area. We're right there. I went too far. That happens. We'll just cut the chuck back a little here. Yeah. Second time's the charm. We're right there. Nice. And this is the stage where not enough and too much is a whisker away. A little bit more. Yeah, a little bit more. That's perfect. Now you need a special tool for making this stay in the chuck. You can make that in your own lathe pretty easy. Now, can everybody see that's running out on the end just a little bit? So I get it to where it's the furthest away from me, and then I'll hit it right here. And then fairly nice. Now you would have a very hard time making any metal chuck that accurately, because the standard run out in the average metal woodworking chuck is 3 to 5 or 6 thousandths of an inch. I can come in here now. I'm going to use my scraper to make this flat. You can always check flatness this way. About right. If we now take a set of dividers and set this for the radius of the work right here. I lightly scratched it on. I can now take a gouge and turn this piece half round. So I've turned this to an ellipse, which lies outside of a circle. And I'm now going to set off another radius. And I will get out a parting tool. Now, I have a number of parting tools. Most of them I grind straight across for the work, but I also have one that I've actually ground this at an angle so that if I put the leading tip behind the cut or to the right, this will cut perfectly off, leaving very little dimple. There we go. Nice square cut. Now, getting the piece out of here can actually be somewhat problematic. And for this reason, I have an extra long knockout bar here somewhere. See, this one won't reach, so I have another one that is considerably longer. Huh. Well, there's another way to get it out of there. We'll just take the knockout bar and put it through it. But it, as you can see, it took a pretty good smack to get that out of there. There we go. And now we can turn this around, and if I take some of the wood out of the center, we can rechuck this right on the equator, and we'll turn the other half to an ellipse. And I'm going to take the time to just very quickly sharpen my scraper, which is a bit dull. That few seconds will make a huge difference in the time that it takes me to do this now. All right, I'm going to take my spindle gouge again and turn this to an ellipse. So we'll knock this out of the chuck now. We now have kind of an egg-shaped thing, and if we put this in the chuck sideways like this, we've got it. And I'm going to take a pencil now, or I can just take the point of this skew. And I've touched perfectly on my equator. Somebody's got a radio playing or something in the background. Could they turn that off, please? Mute your sound. Would somebody mute their sound, whoever has sound in this, please? Thank you. By now turning the equator so it's running this way, when this spins, that perfect circle will ghost a perfect sphere. And this is the way you turn a perfect ball by hand in a lathe. And it's clearly outlined in Lucan's book of 1868 and again by Holtzapfel just before 1900. And it's the way they turn billiard balls and gaming balls, bocce balls, things like that in the past. And if we now take a small scraper and we go in and we just barely, yeah, I threw it out of the chuck, but we would scrape half a sphere, and it would be pretty much a very good gaming ball. I can usually turn them within 6 to 10 thousandths of roundness, and I've turned a good many of them. I've turned a lot of croquet balls. Let me go grab a couple. Well, I can't put my hands on one real quick, so I'm not going to bother. But at any rate, you can turn a pretty darn good gaming ball this way. You can also, it's a great way to turn boxes, and you don't have any sacrificial wood that you have to cut off in the chuck. And it just kind of shows the utility of this simple chuck. You've got to spend some time when you first start doing this in getting enough skill to cut the tapers right. If you can't hold the object, you usually have too steep a taper. And if it kind of goes out of sight, it keeps going back in the chuck, you've got too mild a taper. So with those things in mind, this is a very useful chuck, and it's really good for repair work. Like a common repair job for antique furniture is that you have a little finial that hangs down or sticks up. And the top of that getting whacked off is pretty common. And you can generally get that unglued out of there. It's usually on a round tenon that goes into a drilled hole in the furniture. And you can then jam chuck it, and you can come in and drill a hole and tenon another piece of like wood on there and repair it, bring it back to normal, and you've done the least damage to that piece of furniture that you can do. And it keeps it within the spirit of good restoration. Any questions at this point on jam chucks? Don't be afraid to ask.
You had that on a screw chuck, right?
No, I actually had it on a faceplate.
Okay.
It was just a faceplate holding it with 3 screws. And you can see it'll hold even uneven things. It doesn't have to be an absolutely perfect circle. Another very handy chuck is a glue block. And it's the way we held things for years before we had all of these fancy scroll chucks we have today. But you simply put a block of wood, and it's better if it's, 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches thick. And you put that on a faceplate like that. And again, you can use that tap to screw it on your lathe and not waste the faceplate to this. But here's a rough turn bowl that it's time that it be returned. And so an easy way to do this is with a center and what I call a Nubbin Chuck. And generally one of your jam chucks that are laying around will be a pretty good Nubbin Chuck. And I have the center pretty well located right here. And by coming in here and pressing this with the tailstock, I can go in here with a scraper and scrape this round, and I can come in with another scraper and scrape this dead level in this part. So without too much further ado, we'll just do that. And oddly enough, I actually got less flyers out of students, that is throwing a bowl off the chuck, with glue blocks than I ever got with 4-jaw scroll chucks. Now, it's often a good idea to put a little block of wood under here too if you've got a soft wood and you're going to dent this badly, but I'm not too worried about this for this demonstration. And
recording has stopped automatically, it says, Ernie. I don't know if that matters to you.
All righty, we're back in business. And here's a couple of scrapers I've ground over the years out of old files. And this is one that I can reach right in here like this and scrape this to where it forms a perfect circle. During the drying process, of course, this has gone oval. So this will bring it back to round. little slower. I was tilting that scraper both this way and of course I had it downhill. I'll get in here as close as I can without touching anything. And I'm going to take this scraper now and just run that forward. And I can check flatness by putting my scraper down like this. And I'm perfectly flat across this area. And this being flat here is key to this chuck working, because what we're going to do is turn a tenon on that glue block that fits inside of here, and then we'll turn a shoulder that's flat and mates with this. And we'll put super glue between the two and glue them together. The strength of a glue joint is a shear strength problem, and the strength of the joint drops by a power of 3 as the gap increases. So a perfect gap in most glue is going to be like 1 to 2 thou somewhere. So if you go to, say, a 4,000 gap, that's a 50% difference. So it'd be 2 times 2 is 4 times 8. It's 8 times weaker. So if you taper either wall and don't have a good fit, the strength of it becomes really bad very fast. And that's why in woodworking, we really strive to get good fits in all our joints, because it makes the glue work. Now I can help myself a little by taking my dividers here, and I'm going to set them to this diameter. I'm a little bigger than it right now. Bring them in just a little bit here. And I can set this off on the glue block and save myself a lot of time in getting a good fit here. Any questions as I'm moving paraphernalia around here?
Hey, Ernie,
Go ahead.
when you were doing that ball, you said that you spun the thing around so that you could shave it down to that ghost shape. How many times do you have to spin that ball around until the thing is perfectly round?
Generally, I do it by halves, and I have a pretty good ball at that point. And then you just start randomly chucking it at any angle that suits your fancy. I usually put some pencil scribbles on it so I know where I am. And then you start sanding it with really coarse paper. You want to start with 60 grit, maybe 60 to 80. If you don't use real coarse grit sandpaper, you'll sand the face grain faster than you sand the end grain, and you'll actually sand it out around. But if you use coarse paper, it'll actually get rounder as you randomly sand it. All right, so I'm going to stick this one on here. And now, this is faceplate work because we have the grain running this way. So we don't want to use our spindle tools on this. We're going to use our bowl gouge. Now we'll go back to our little scraper here. And we'll take our dividers and set off that radius. There, we're perfectly centered. Got a scratch mark where our tenon should be. Now, a way to achieve a fit, and this is good if you're putting lids on boxes or any kind of a fit in a wood lathe, is I've raised the tenon here, but I cut a little chamfer on it. So as I take my mating piece here, I can kind of feel if I'm inside that chamfer. I've got a ways to go yet. I'm not dropping over the, I'm close, but I'm not that close. So if you go about one chamfer distance at a time on this process, you usually do pretty good. I've taken the chamfer away. I've reestablished the chamfer. Stop the lathe. Slide my. Ways to go yet. Close. One thing to remember with lathes, if you feel the fit is a 32nd loose, you want to take a 64th off the material, because when you're cutting here, you're also removing over here. So it's twice whatever you take off. And that can be vexing. We're right there. We're very close now. Almost a press fit. I've actually done these off of press fits. You can do that. There we go. Very nice. I've got very little play in it, but you can actually have about a 32nd of play or more in this, and it doesn't matter. A millimeter even of play would be fine. We've got a nice fit. It's actually kind of staying there by itself. Let me grab some super glue. Now the glue really doesn't do much good on the tenon. It only does good on this shouldered area. So I'm putting it there. And I'll put this on and turn it like that to smear the glue around. And we have now got a really good chucking on this bowl. We can do just about anything we want to it without it flying off. And when we do want to purposely take it off, what we would do is get a pretty good size parting tool out with a fairly square end on it. I hit my tool wrist. I'll take that glue quick, right? They still hold. At any rate, I didn't check my clearance before I did that. But we're going to cut right here in the glue block. In this area, we're going to cut under to the tenon. And it'll, at that point, just drop right off on your hands, in your hands. It's not a big deal. Yeah, that glue wasn't dry yet. I hadn't cured it. It would have been all right to show you that, but it wouldn't take the strain of what we're doing. In fact, even if it was dry, I probably would have knocked it off. But you can see how this is a pretty good and really cheap chucking method. And for some natural edge bowls and things like that, it's the only way you can do it, because you can get that numbed down inside of a big natural edge running around here, get this base right, get it on a glue block. It's really secure, and you can turn the rest of the piece and cut it off. And then you go back to the Nubbin Chuck, and often once you have the inside cleaned up and everything, what you want to do is put a piece of like linen cloth that has a very kind of coarse tooth to it over the Nubbin Chuck, put the bowl on, catch it with a center and a little block of wood, and then you can trim and clean up the base of the bowl and leave it so that there's no chucking marks whatsoever in the turning of that. So this technique really allows you to do some things that would be hard to do with store-bought chucks. And just to give this a try at seeing if it'll hold even on the second gluing, it seems pretty good here. Let me put a bowl gouge to this, see what happens.
Lost the video again, Ernie.
Did it stop? Yep. Okay. There we go. I've got to move my tailstock. The handle's hitting my tailstock. But you can see that I was cutting just fine in there. It's a piece of box elder, which grows prodigiously around here. I had a big one on my property line go down a couple of years ago. And I got 2 or 3 growing around the shop. But it's a pretty wood, and it almost always has a red streak in it. I don't know if you can see right there. There's a little red streak running through the center. It's right there. May not be able to see it on camera. Any rate, questions on this? I'll open up to any questions and or discussions we want to have. And
Ernie, I have a question.
sure.
How do you get on your mailing list? A friend of mine told me about this. That's how I found it. Is there a way to get on your mailing list?
Sure. Go to our website, and there's a sign-up sheet there. And there's both fiber and wood, because Susan teaches spinning and weaving
Right.
for traditional craft. We teach traditional crafts. And so you can get on one or both lists.
Okay, thank you.
And sign up for our YouTube channel too. We always appreciate that, because we're trying to get
that I'm on. That's great.
cool. But at any rate, this demonstration didn't go wasn't my greatest demonstration ever in the world. Kind of went a little rough this morning. Sometimes it's that way. This is live theater, and the actors call in sick sometimes. I don't know. And the gremlins take over.
It's actually good to see something like that, though.
Well, yeah, that's true. Something goes too slick, you wonder if it's staged. So, but this gives you an idea, and you can see that these fits take some patience. I can usually do this fit on this one faster than I did. The other one was about the same. And the block of wood I picked for the jam chuck wasn't the best piece of wood I ever picked. It was a piece of that box elder, and it was a little wonky. Woods that are really good for jam chucks are white oak, maple. Box elder is actually in the maple family, so I thought it might work okay, but it was a little soft. But either hard or soft maple, any of those species of that make great chucks. Most of the English churners back in the day used to use boxwood, but boy, boxwood would be way too pricey to make into a chuck today. Cherry doesn't work very well. It's a little too soft. Poplar's terrible. But so you need to stay with a firm wood. Hickory probably would work great, but it's almost too hard. Other questions?
Ernie, can I ask you a question about something completely different?
Sure.
I've got I don't know, a 20-year-old 14-inch Delta bandsaw, and I'm looking to upgrade it. And I've looked for these extensions that you can put on bandsaws, but there's not one available. So I decided to bite the bullet and buy a new bandsaw. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, sure. Because I did that when I moved out of my old shop 2 years ago. And I had put up with a Delta 14-inch bandsaw with a riser block for years, like 20 years. And it was a rickety, shaky thing that was semi-dangerous. But it cut whole blanks okay, but it was terrible to use. If I could have, I think I might have, just for the enjoyment, taken it out at the back field and shot at it for a while or something, or beat it with sledgehammers, but it sold at auction. So I bought a big Rikon. It's in the background there. I think you can see it if I step out of it. It's an 18-inch saw. There's a video on Woodworkers Journal site that I made about using a bandsaw. But you want, for turners today, you want one of these big bandsaws. And it isn't to us so much what you call the throat, which is the distance from the column to the blade. 14 inches plenty for us, because we can cut the circle from the outside and let it hang off the table. What we're more interested in is the height of the cut. And all of them today are solid welded steel frames, which just works fine for that. And you want at least 12 inches for a height of cut. And I think mine goes out to 18 or some ridiculous number like that. Let me check. Yeah, it goes to pretty near 20 inches height of cut. And where I used to rip logs with a chainsaw, and I have a 70cc chainsaw with a really big bar on it, and I'd rip these pieces into planks and then saw them with a bandsaw into a circle. Nowadays, I simply buck them nice and square with a chainsaw so that I have a round log, and then I set that log down on the table of the bandsaw. I've drawn parallel lines across it, and I just bandsaw it into planks. And one, it's a heck of a lot safer than a bandsaw, and two, it makes a much nicer cut with much leveler planks that I get out of that. And then I can lay out circles and cut it rounds. You do want to make one attachment for your saw. And that is just this simple V block that I made out of a piece of 2x4 and a block of scrap poplar. But this allows me to lay this on the table with that piece upright on the table like that and very safely push it through the blade without getting my fingers anywhere near that blade. And I can actually put this against my chest and kind of push it with my hands out to the side. So that's a very, very important accessory for your bandsaw that you should make the minute you get it running properly.
Is there any make that's any better than the other? I was looking at one from Jet, which seems to be a fairly new one with a welded steel frame. But I have no idea.
Well, the Jet one is very good. I've done a lot of consulting for Jet, and I could have bought it at their cost. However, Rikon offered me a deal that was so good I couldn't refuse it. So I got a Rikon. A Rikon is a very nice saw. It's fine, but the Jet is a little better, I think.
Okay.
Another very good one is Lagoona. Makes a very nice bandsaw. So those are two brands you could really look at.
Okay, I have a Lagoona Lathe, so and I'm very pleased with it. It's very well made.
Their banjo has some problems, and so the lathe is the speed control in a Lagoona is beautiful. It's really well done, but
yeah.
Their banjo is a work in progress, and I think you probably could overcome the problem with local fixes, but the banjos are something I rant and rave at. Even on the Powermatic, which I worked on the design, I said we should have improved the banjo, but we were sort of out of money on the project at that point. And
tell me more about the banjo. I'm not sure I understand what that is.
Let me change cameras here. Some people would call it a tool base, but I'm going to zoom out a bit here. And this is the banjo. This part right
okay.
here. And it holds the tool rest. And a banjo should, with minimal pressure right here, I'm pushing just down with my thumb, it should lock solid. I can move that a little. But one way I think has the best banjo in the world. This is now really solid with not reefing on this, but I've pushed down solidly. And likewise, the tool rest, minimum pressure, it is there. If any of this stuff moves, especially doing like a natural edge bowl and you've got the rest inside of it, you're toast. You've ruined the work and you could get hurt. I like their rest so much that for one of my Powermatics, I spent $350 to buy their banjo. They'll make it for most any good size lathe. and I swapped out the banjo for a one-way, and it works really nice.
Well, thank you. I just have one more question. When you come to finish the inside of a bowl with sanding, I think Sorby have a thing where it just spins, the revolving lathe spins the sanding attachment on the Sorby tool. It has no motor. Is that any better than having a motor-driven sanding disc?
It's not better. It's maybe cheaper than an electric drill, but electric drills are so cheap today that, and it's not one you want to spend a lot of money on because you're sucking all that abrasive dust through the motor of the drill. And so you want to buy a Sears and get the guarantee and take it back every 2 years for another one. But at any rate, that Sorby sanding gizmo, I call the auto gyro sander because it's like an auto gyro plane, which the rotor spins from the forward motion of the plane. Any other questions?
Ernie, what's your favorite lathe?
Well, that's kind of the day of the week it is, I guess. For the lathe book, I brought in the little Robust Scout, and boy, Robust makes a beautiful lathe today. And One Way makes a beautiful. I'd say they were the two top builders these days, and they do build domestically, and they have ownership that understand turning, and their passion is to build a really good tool. So I think they would be my two top recommendations. However, saying that, the Powermatic makes a pretty good line. Their very biggest lathe, I'm not sure that it's almost too big for most amateur workshops. And yes, you have some specific need. And you've got to remember that if you buy a really big lathe and you mostly do medium or small size work, every time you move this huge banjo around, it's a lot of effort. It's more difficult to precisely locate it, where a little tiny lathe that you can move the thing when it just weighs ounces instead of pounds is better. So you want to be always thinking of what scale of work am I going to do, and appropriately buy your lathe.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, Ernie, you mentioned a video or instructional on your bandsaw, or setting up a bandsaw or using a bandsaw. I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit. I have a large grizzly bandsaw that is good for roughing out planks, but I always seem to have trouble if I'm trying to do anything more precise. And I just wondered if you had anything reference-wise to that.
Well, the video I reference is mostly is for.
Ernie, you've lost the camera.
Yeah, I'm going over to push the right button. I write for every issue of Woodworkers Journal, which is a magazine owned by Rockler Corporation. I write a turning. I've done it for, I think, going on 9 years now. So there's a lot of videos that I've made for that. When you write an article today, you can't just write an article. You have to do a video too, because they use one to sell the other. So the web sells the magazine, and the magazine sells the web. But at any rate, I have one on the bandsaw, but it's mostly on setting up a bandsaw and making it, running it safely to cut bowl blanks. There's a lot of things you can do to a bandsaw to try to improve it, but if it was a bad design to start with, it sometimes takes a lot of effort. I wouldn't know without looking at it what was wrong, but places to look are alignment of the two wheels, which have tires on it. They have to be coplanar, that they're exactly aligned. Generally, by angling the top wheel a little, it gets the blade to run on the crown. You want to check the tires, and you can buy replacement tires. And if it's the guides are just not all they could be, you can go to Carter Corporation, which is based in Michigan. They make a lot of turning accessories too. They make a very good turner's back gate for doing hollow forms. That's very reasonably priced. It works very well. But Carter, stock and trade for a long time, has been aftermarket bandsaw guides that you can retrofit your saw with, and it'll often make a huge difference in how the saw runs. But again, if the wheels aren't right, then you're not going to be able to increase the performance with guides. You got to make sure that it's running on the wheels properly and the tension's right and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I appreciate everybody joining me this morning. Next week will be another joinery session in which we will bring building a Shaker Campbell box around full circle and show an alternate method of making it, in which we actually fit the bottom panel into a groove, and an alternate dovetailing method that allows us to plow the groove for that dovetail or for that panel without having to stop the groove in the tailboard. So that will come up with a YouTube premiere at 10 with a follow-up question and answer at 10:45 right here on Zoom. Don't forget to join the channel. We appreciate that. Also, on our website, we sell my book, which came out August 4th, is the 3rd edition of the Lathe book. And it is a lot of pages about hardware, telling you about anything you want to know about a lathe, tools, or accessories, and a little bit on turning. We didn't put a lot on turning techniques, but because I think it's hard to teach turning techniques in a book, quite frankly. But at any rate, I sell it on our website cheaper than Amazon. It's $21 post-paid to your house, except if you're in Germany. Any other questions? Well, I'll wish everybody a good weekend here, and I'll see you next Saturday.